So let's say you found a skeleton. How would you tell if it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, hello everybody. Dapper Dinosaur here, as I'm sure you know, and I'm here with Dr. Josh Bowen of Digital Hammurabi. He is a professor who specializes in ancient Mesopotamian languages. He's got a new book, The Atheist Guide to the Old Testament, which is linked in the description, as well as a book that he wrote with his wife about how to read Sumerian, which is also linked in the description. And if you want to find his YouTube channel, also in the description. So check out that description. Dr. Josh, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you.
All right. Well, I don't want to stand on ceremony. Could you give us a sort of like two-sentence overview of what are the major languages in the ancient Mesopotamian region? What are we talking about when we say ancient Mesopotamian languages?
Yeah, primarily Sumerian and Akkadian. Obviously, there are other languages that filter in, but those are the two big ones that people talk about in Mesopotamia, Sumerian and Akkadian.
Now, those two languages are, from my understanding, quite different languages, despite the fact that we think of them we think of them together and they're in the same region. So could you describe real quickly what is it that makes these very different languages?
Yeah. So Akkadian's very straightforward, right? It's a Semitic language. So, it's in the same language family as Hebrew or Arabic or Aramaic, Syriac, Ugaritic. Yeah, so they're all Semitic languages. So they have similar root systems and ways of constructing verbal paradigms, all that stuff. Sumerian is what they call a language isolate, and so it's just sort of out there on its own.
Right.
We don't know any other language that's related to it. I can promise you that there are always people that comment on our YouTube videos that say they actually know, which languages are related to it. I don't think they're correct. But far better minds have worked on it than mine. So,
out of curiosity, what are some of the popular like weird ideas about what Sumerian is related to?
There's so many of them. Chinese was, I think, the last one that I saw. Yeah, I mean, it's like, what? No, come on, guys.
Okay.
There are. There's one that always pops up. I've sort of learned to tune them out, as Kelly from The Office said.
Yeah, I
talk so much.
I get that because there's so much crazy stuff that comes up with language isolates, and it so rarely turns out to actually work. Like I remember one point, someone was trying to convince me that like Korean was related to the Finno-Ugric languages, and I was just like, no, I don't. Just no, just stop, please. Just don't. So yeah, I get that. So which of these languages has an older record in terms of like what we actually have written down?
Yeah, the world's oldest language, the world's oldest writing language that's in writing is almost certainly, let's say most likely Sumerian.
Okay.
So so that it's clear, and if anybody's ever watched me before, they'll know what's coming. This particular area, like fourth millennium development of Sumerian or Proto-Sumerian, whatever it is that people want to call it, is a very specialized area of Assyriology. So, and it's not what I focused in on. So
Right.
I can talk about it, but if people are interested in this sort of thing, people like Gonzalo Rubio, Robert Englund, Piotr Mikulovsky, like these are people that have written on this sort of thing that are obviously far more brilliant than I am. But yeah, so the earliest texts that we have come from the mid to late fourth millennium. They're like numerical texts, accounting texts, those sorts of administrative texts.
This many
And
head of cattle, that many bushels of wheat.
that's right. And while, some people, I think Robert Englund would argue that they're not strictly Sumerian, Gonzalo Rubio says no, they have these phonetic complements, these phonetic, basically, and we can talk about how cuneiform works, but they're basically little signs that go next to the main signs that tell you how they're supposed to be pronounced.
Okay.
And he argues that it really only works if that language is Sumerian, the way that those words are supposed to be pronounced phonetically. It only works if it's a Sumerian language. So almost certainly, I think that the earliest texts from the fourth millennium are in the Sumerian language.
Okay. And when do we start getting written Akkadian then?
Middle of, you have like early dynastic Akkadian. So like, I think it's right around 2500. Certainly then you get a lot of Akkadian in the Sargonic period under Sargon of Akkad, so lots of royal inscriptions. It's got its own grammar and syntax. But it's in the third millennium, middle of the third millennium.
Okay, so we've got about, was it like 500 to 800 years or so before we start getting Akkadian in
Yeah.
there? Okay.
Yeah, I would say so.
All right, so these first texts in Sumerian, because I want to get a little bit of like a historical, and we're not going to go super in depth in the early stuff, but so this is primarily like an accounting thing, so like tax records and things like that. Or when do we start getting like actual sentences where you can say, okay, this is actually a sentence in either prose or verse in Sumerian, and now we've gone away from just simple accounting and we're getting to the point where this is more like a text like people traditionally think of a text as opposed to like a receipt?
When we start getting sentences, it's certainly early dynastic. You do. I haven't worked with the fourth millennium texts enough to tell you specifically when that starts to actually take place chronologically. Maybe it would help to talk about, for the listeners, it would talk about like how writing developed.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because I think that will probably at least shed some light on the general context. So, the way that there's a person, several people have worked on this. Denise Schmott-Besserat wrote a book, 2-volume book, very hefty, I think back in the early 2000s, maybe mid 2000s, on these little mostly clay things that she called tokens.
Okay.
And people have known about them obviously for a very long time. They show up in all the assemblages, in the region. And basically what we've learned, and I think most scholars would agree, is that originally, at least some of these tokens, some of these types of tokens represented individual commodities. So like this shape or this token with a certain, incision on it or whatever, this represented a sheep. And so if you had 3 tokens, you had, like that, you had 3 sheep that it was accounting for. Well, what they started to do for security reasons, for, identification of who owns what, they started to take these clay balls that were hollow on the inside, and they would enclose those 3 tokens that represent those 3 sheep in that clay ball. And then they'd either roll a cylinder seal across it, or they'd stamp it with a seal, and it indicated like who it belonged to. And when that hardened, it was like, okay, you could like shake it and hear the tokens that were inside, and that indicated that whatever was in there belonged to that individual. Well, if you think about how that worked, in order to figure out how many were in there, you'd have to break it, right, to get the tokens out and count them. So
not
what
the
they
most
started,
convenient system.
no, definitely not. So what they started doing before they enclosed them in the clay ball, the envelope they called it, they would impress them on the outside.
Okay.
So if there were three tokens like this on the inside that represented 3 sheep, they would impress those 3 tokens on the outside or whatever it is that was out there.
Okay. I think
and
I
then
can
they would
see where
seal
this
them
is
inside.
going. At a certain point, why do you need the tokens?
Exactly. So they just flattened out the ball and started either using the tokens or using a stylus, using their finger. And that's how writing developed. So, I mean, you can see how from an economic, like in this administrative accounting, that necessity, the necessity of that usage sort of brought about that development.
Okay.
We start getting, it looks like we have at least a quasi-literary text in the early dynastic period, like the early dynastic period. It's a thing called the tribute list. What exactly it is, I think, is still debated, but it does seem to have some literary forms to it. There's also a thing called the figure à plume, which is, again, another, probably has some mythological aspects to it. It's still difficult to understand exactly what's going on in it. But certainly by later parts of the early dynastic period, so we're talking about, still right around the middle of the 3rd millennium, you have 2 main sites, Farah and Abu Salabik. And, from there we start to see certain, like, definite pieces of literature. And then, of course, as you get into the Sargonic period and into the Ur III period, you start to see more literary texts, so down into the end of the 3rd millennium. And then there's this huge explosion of Sumerian literature in the early 2nd millennium, and we can talk about that in more detail, but that's where the bulk of the preserved Sumerian literature comes from, is that early portion of the 2nd millennium that's called the Old Babylonian period.
Okay. And real quick, we have a 26 super chat from Command Cyborg who says, great topic. I'll catch this on reply. I think he means replay, unfortunately. Well, Command Cyborg, thank you for stopping in and super chatting, and I hope you enjoy it on the replay. Or on the reply. I don't know. Whichever one you want.
Whichever one.
Yeah. Which actually, the little misspelling there actually leads me into a little bit of a segue, because I want to talk about how it is that you go from basically drawing pictures based on little clay figures of sheep or whatever to having a written system where you can't physically draw everything that you need to say. Things like verbs and many adjectives are hard to just draw a picture of. So how do we get there?
So that is a fantastic question. So as you're saying, initially this was just sort of writing out, this sign represents this thing, right? And then these signs represent numbers. How many of them? That was a development. But eventually they realized that when they let's say the word for milk is ga. Well, ga has its own sound, right? Its own phonetic value.
Right.
So if you wanted to say the word gandu, like let me build, you could use the sign that stood for milk, that's pronounced ga, along with the sign for on and the sign for do, to build, and you could string them all together and create the sound gandu as a word.
Right.
Now, ga, milk, on, sky, and do, to build. If you put them all together, you don't say like milk sky build.
Right. That's just nonsense.
Right? Yeah, or like this. But see, just as a side note, this is what people today that have like this Ancient Aliens. If you've heard of like Zechariah Sitchin.
Oh goodness, yeah. Okay.
This is the sort of stuff that they do. So like ga on do. I'm glad I used that example because that's one is apt.
Obviously,
so
aliens
means,
told us how to build milk or something. I don't know.
Or yeah, like maybe it refers to the Milky Way because it's milk in the sky, the
Oh,
Milky Way
goodness.
to build, like but the thing is that's not what it's doing at all. There's a thing, it's called the rebus principle, and you probably know that, but just for the
Mhm.
people watching, it's utilizing how a word sounds and using it separate from its meaning as a noun. A really good example that I use of this is if you go to, like, if I go to a graduation and uh, I they ask me to write my name out phonetically,
Right.
um, I wouldn't write Joshua. That's how it's spelled. I would write JAH dash SHOE dash WAH, Joshua. Now, the in the middle there, shoe, SHOE. My name doesn't have anything to do with
Footwear,
footwear,
yeah. Yeah.
right? I'm using it separate from, irrespective of its meaning.
Right.
I'm just using it for the sound, and so that's what they realized that they could do. So that's how Sumerian developed. Is you have three different ways that individual cuneiform signs can be used. Um, One is the standard as a noun
Mhm.
or as a verb, what it means. So if you have the word uh, A2, it means house. If you have do three, it means to build. If you have, ga, it means milk. On, it means sky. Dinger, it means God, whatever. Um, However, as we just talked about, they could then use all those words as they sound phonetically. And
Right.
in fact, what eventually happened is some of those words that have um, that they start taking on different phonetic values because some of the signs can be used to write different words. Um, and so then they can have multiple phonetic values, which gets a little confusing, right? Because
Right.
now, like the be sign, be, can when you get down into later uh, cuneiform writing in Sumerian and Akkadian, particularly in Akkadian, be can also be read bod, bot, or till.
Oh, that last one's not confusing at all.
Yeah, so be, bod, bot, bot, till. Like and when you memorize these cuneiform signs, you have to memorize them like that.
Right.
It could be any of those, and it just depends on the context. It depends on what signs are around it. Anyway,
Okay.
so it can be used for the word itself. It can be used as it sounds, like as a phonetic thing. And then there's a third, which also helped them in identifying what certain words were, and it's something called a determinative.
Okay.
And basically, if the word guza in Sumerian means chair, and the word nish means wood. So what they could do is they could put the word nish for wood in front of the word guza for chair, and that would tell you that this is a chair that's made of wood.
Okay.
And so they wouldn't pronounce that nish guza, they would just pronounce it guza, but they would see that nish determinative in front of it, and they just know that guza that is made of wood.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So you have them for, like, this is the name of a deity. They would put a star in front of the word or in front of the name, and it would be that little star is the word for dinger, and it just means this thing coming up as a god. They have it for a river, they have it for a city, they have it for land, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Real quick, we have a couple things to read and then a quick question. So Vishanti, who's been a member for 3 months, thank you very much, says, I'm almost as dapper as the dino, followed up but with a Godzilla emoji. And she also, for $10, says, towards the book fund. Thank you. The book fund always needs money. So we also have a question from the Venerable Bede, who asks, what do those numbers mean in Do 3? When you mentioned that, yeah.
Yeah, so if you think about the English words deer and deer, DEER and DEAR, they both sound the same.
Mm-hmm.
but they're different words completely. The same is true. Yeah, so they're homophonous, right? It's the same sound. So the same thing is true in Sumerian. You have a bunch of different words that sound like do, for example. Do can mean to build. Do can mean to be good. Do can mean to say. There are lots of them. But they each have a different cuneiform sign. So when, if we were just reading things in cuneiform, it wouldn't matter. That's the do sign, that's the do sign, that's the do sign. And we just know that that one means to say and that one means to build, and we move on with life. But because, we have to work with these texts, what scholars did is they said, all right, well, this one here, that means to I don't know, to go. No, it's to build. Sorry, let me go back to the English. So deer and deer, if we were going to say the deer, DEER, to distinguish it from dear, like dear Miss Sally, we would call DEER dear one.
Mhm.
And then DEAR would be dear two.
Right.
And I can't think of any other words that sound like deer. But anyway, deer one and deer two. So you're saying deer one, everybody remembers deer one means like the four-legged animal, and
Right.
deer two means what you say at the beginning of a letter. So like do three is the third do cuneiform sign. That the third one that sounds like do.
Right.
And that means to build. Well, do 11 is the 11th one, and it means to say or to speak, and so on. So like A2 is the word for house. What's another one that's really common? Boy, that's terrible. A3 means to go. A11 means to go up or go down, right?
All the way
But
to
it's
11
because
now.
yeah. It's just that we distinguish between which value of deer is this. Is it the first one? Is it the second one? Is it the third one? And then you just remember from do 3, do 11, do 10, whatever, what those meanings are. I hope that made sense.
All right. So one thing I want to say is that it's interesting because you have the exact same set of different uses for signs in other languages, like say Egyptian, right? So a typical Egyptian word ends up getting written with a number of signs that are just there for pronunciation, and it doesn't matter what the actual sign is. There might be a duck followed by a hand and followed by a little picture of a house, and what those are pictures of doesn't matter at all. But then typically most Egyptian words end with a determinative that tells you, is it a person, is it a kind of boat, is it the name of a city or a god or something like that. And but then also some signs can be used as what the picture is. So I think that's. Do you think that there was borrowing there, or do you think those are independent but parallel developments? You're roboting, Dr. Josh. You might have to reconnect. Hold with us. Let's see. The Venerable Bede asks, did Sumerian have more homophones than normal? I will keep that in mind and ask that. 2D Lifeform says 4D Lifeform should be a thing. I mean, I don't know that they're a real thing, but I'm okay with them being a thing that you come up with in a fictional setting. That sounds like fun to me. So, do get questions ready. There's going to be a dedicated Q&A session towards the end, where we're going to take just as many audience questions as we can. So if I don't get to yours during the course of this, save it up, chat it. And here's Dr. Josh back again.
How's that? Is that better?
That's a lot better. Yeah, you were roboting pretty badly. So
sorry about that.
As a refresher, I had just said, I'd asked, do you think that the fact that Egyptian hieroglyphics and hieratic, to a lesser extent demotic, tend to have the exact same kinds of signs used in a very similar way, do you think that's a result of parallel development or borrowing, or do you think that might be hard to say? Or
Yeah, I mean, I've never heard anybody say anything about it being borrowing. I never learned Egyptian, um, which is much to my chagrin sometimes. But yeah, I don't know that I'd be able to speak to it. I can't. I would be very surprised if it's considered borrowing.
okay,
It's probably just parallel development.
it does seem like a pretty logical progression for the development of a writing system, where you start with just, well, I need to say this, the concept of, say, a duck, so I draw a duck, and then
Yeah.
from there you kind of move on. We did have a question from the Venerable Bede, who asked, does Sumerian have an unusually high number of homophones?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if it's unusual, but
Is that because of like
okay.
a small phonemic inventory, or?
I think it's mostly because they have monosyllabic words.
Okay, yeah, that'd do it.
Yeah, a lot of monosyllabic words, so there are only a certain number of phonemes, I guess, that you can put together. So a lot of overlap.
Okay. Now, so we have this development of Sumerian using these determinatives and phonetic signs and occasionally logograms. And for anyone who doesn't, a logogram is just when you draw a sign that it just is a sign for the word on its own. So, for instance, like you were saying, a sign for star might mean star or God on its own. You don't have to write out any phonetic component to that. Now, that gets does that get just imported for the most part by the Akkadians? What kind of adaptations do they do? Because I would imagine that, being very different languages, cuneiform, as used by the Sumerians, is not exactly perfect for recording a Semitic language on its own.
Yeah, so what ends up happening is you get this interesting amalgamation of the languages. So the same cuneiform system is used to write out the Akkadian words. However, there are lots and lots of times when the Akkadian will just bring the logogram over and write it just in the middle of the sentence. It's very, very common. So oftentimes what they will do is they'll write, let's say the word for house is A2, but in Akkadian it's Beatum. So what they might do is write the sign, the Sumerian word A2, and then next to it put the tum sign. And that tells you, as like a phonetic complement,
Okay.
that tells you that you're supposed to read that as Beatum. And that happens with nouns, that happens with verbs. So it's, again, it's like, it's like they mix up, they use, I guess maybe is a better way to say, they use lots of Sumerian logograms and determinatives in order to write the Semitic language in Akkadian.
That kind of reminds me of something that happens in a lot of, especially the traditional forms of the written language of a lot of East Asian languages, where Chinese characters will get brought in, both in some contexts for phonetic for their phonetic value, but then also as the logograms. And so you'll get instances like Japanese where you'll have, okay, this is a Chinese character and it has these 3 different phonetic readings, but it also could just be the word with a X with a completely different phonetic reading. And so that's one of the reasons why Japanese is notoriously hard to learn to read. So I would imagine that made Akkadian fairly hard to learn to read. Would that be?
Yeah, it's a depressing process sometimes to learn something like Akkadian, because as you're memorizing these cuneiform signs, like I was saying, you see that be sign and you say, all right, you memorize be, and you're looking at it, you're like, okay, I got to remember that. Okay, 2 horizontals and then 2 Winkelhaken. Okay, good. I got, all right, now I remember that's the be sign. And you look down and it could also be ba, be, bod, bot, or till. You're like, Christ's sake, you know, the nice thing about Akkadian is that very often, I'd say very, very often, when they're writing out, let's say iparas, the word iparas, they'll write out the I sign, and then they'll write out par, the par sign, and then ras. And if the R at the end of par and the R at the beginning of ras,
Right.
Oftentimes if you've got something like, I don't know, if you've got the sign before it ends in a T, and then you've got the bass sign, your first guess is to go with till as the value, because that ends with T and till begins with T, and they often will match up like that.
That raises a question for me. So I know other Semitic languages frequently have geminate consonants. Does Akkadian do that?
Yep, definitely.
Is there an easy way?
Vexing thing.
Okay, I was going to say, is there an easy way to tell the difference between just using the end of the end letter in the consonant and the beginning as just to remind you which sign you're coming out, and versus when it's geminate?
There are sometimes little tricks, little clues, but oftentimes you can't just go with, oh, it's written twice, therefore that's what it has to be. It can be frustrating that way.
That's actually a frustration in Arabic. Arabic tends to just write geminate consonants as a single consonant, and only when you're going through and writing all the little vowels, which usually only happens like in books for kids, do you actually put the little symbol that means, oh no, pronounce this meme extra. Like, this is a geminate meme. Yeah. It's like, okay, thanks. So yeah, I'm familiar with
the little W looking thing.
Yeah, I'm familiar with this problem in Semitic languages where they're just like, we don't need to indicate geminate consonants. It's like, yeah, but they're phonemic. You kind of do need to.
It's funny because I'm teaching Sumerian on Sunday evenings on the Atheist Network Group's channel, and I had this conversation with Oz. Man, what was I saying? I just lost it. Damn it! Oh, I said I wrote out on my little whiteboard. Josh went to the store yesterday, but I left all the vowels out. And there were a couple places where he was like, because there was just two T's in a row.
Right.
And it was like, but after, a couple of seconds, he's like, Josh went to the store yesterday. I was like, well, how did you know that? Right. And it's because you know the language. So this is one of the things about Sumerian is that in particularly something like the verbal form, it's not fixed. They could add things to the verbal chain. They could take things away from the verbal chain. And it would mean the same thing. It's just if they were being thoughtful, I guess, for the later reader, they would add more elements in, more grammatical elements in to make it clear what was going on in the sentence. But they definitely didn't have to do it because, they understood what was supposed to be there, all the things that weren't present.
Right.
So it can be fun in a challenging way.
Yeah, it's a very particular kind of fun for a very particular
kind of person. Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah. I understand that kind of fun. So actually that raises a question. So I wanted to ask questions. So what is sort of a high-level grammatical overview of how Sumerian works? So I know that it's been described as agglutinative, and for the audience, a real-world example, well, not real, this is real-world, a modern example of a currently spoken language that is agglutinative, one example would be Turkish. So in Turkish, if you want to modify the grammatical form of verbs or nouns, you just keep tacking on different affixes to it, and eventually you can get these very long single words that in English would be an entire noun phrase, or in some cases an entire sentence.
Yeah. So. And that's how Sumerian, that's how Sumerian works. So, if you want to say king, you say Lugal. If you want to say for the king or to the king, you say lugal ra. If you want to say kings, you say lugal ene. And if you want to say to the kings, you say lugal ene ra. Right? It's like you just, as you say, you just sort of tack things on. And the same thing is true in the verbal form. You could put later prefixes on, or suffixes, and it's you just sort of keep building on to it
Okay.
in order to add grammatical features.
So, what kinds of things tend to get grammaticized on a verb? Do we mark for person? We're marking for, is there a gender system? Are we marking for mood, tense, aspect? What are we marking for in Sumerian verbs?
Yeah. So they do animate and
I'm sorry, you broke up there.
so-
I think you said there was an animacy distinction.
yeah. So humans and deities are considered animate, and then everything else is considered inanimate. And they distinguish it that way, but they mark for person.
Just the
they
subject?
No, object as well.
Okay, so you're getting double marking. Okay.
Mm-hmm. It can be lots of fun. Because sometimes they'll write the object and sometimes they won't.
Right.
You just have to kind of figure it out. But they'll mark for, case in the verb. So dative, comitative, terminative, ablative, they'll put it all in there.
So we're incorporating some of the nouns in the argument into the verbal chain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Modality gets involved there. Aspect gets involved. Yes, I mean they mark. They mark
quite a bit.
Things they don't mark.
So far, the things you haven't mentioned that I know of languages marking, volition and evidentiality. Is there any marking for that?
Yeah, volition, yes. So I always want to be careful with this as well. Say the strictly linguistic. It sounds weird to say this. The strictly linguistic aspects of Sumerology is also a sort of specialized area of Assyriology. Now, a lot of the Assyriologists are brilliant enough that they can do that and everything else.
Right.
I'm not brilliant enough to do that and everything else. But yeah, so like that word "ga," let me do something, or I wish to do something. That gets marked, or let him, let her, let it. Yeah,
okay, so we're getting some
marked.
mood type distinctions in there too. Okay, that's quite a lot. I mean, that's compared to English. That's English has a bare paucity of verb forms, and so that's pretty interesting. And we're incorporating arguments of the verb into the verbal chain itself. So really, this is getting closer to, in terms of modern languages, maybe Navajo or Dine, depending on which term you're preferring, where a lot of times the subject and object of the verb, and sometimes even indirect options and things like that, will end up inside the verb as part of a extremely long verb that ends up being the entire sentence.
Yep.
So what things do nouns get marked for? I'm assuming that we have some kind of case system, since we already described a sort of dative case.
So they'll mark both.
You roboted again, Dr. Josh. Hold on. I don't know why we're having a bad connection today. So could you just start back over? Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, sure. So they'll mark both in the verbal chain and on the noun. Okay. So, for example, the ablative, away from or from something is ta, ta. And so, if you wanted to say away from the city, the word for city is uru, so you would say uru ta.
Okay.
Away from the city. In the verbal chain, they'll say ba, which is a conjugation prefix, ta, for the ablative, and then yen to go. So ba ta yen. So uruta from the city, ba ta yen, he went away from the city. So the ta in the verbal chain is like corresponding to, it's, referring to that ta that's on the end of uru.
Okay.
And so you can mark all the cases on the nouns. So there's a terminative, ablative, locative, dative. There's a locative terminative case. What am I forgetting?
Is there
There's ergative, there's absolutive.
Okay, so actually that was going to be one of my questions: is what kind of alignment are we doing? Is it nominative accusative or ergative absolutive?
It's split. Yeah, it's split ergativity.
Okay, can I guess?
Yeah, please.
Is it that first person subjects tend to be nominative accusative, whereas third person tends to be ergative absolutive in terms of subjects?
It's weirder.
Okay.
Because that would make sense.
That's the most common pattern for ergative absolutive alignment is like first person tends to end up being nominative accusative, and then second person is a toss up, and then third person ends up being ergative absolutive.
The way that Sumerian does it is most of the time. Actually,
hold on. First, let's talk about what that means, because I just realized that you and I know what that means, but we're weirdos. Okay.
I was thinking, my God, this is like a brilliant audience, and I'm sure your audience is brilliant just to be able to be here. But I was like, damn, you guys know your shit. So yeah, that makes me feel a little bit better.
Okay, yeah. So I'm a crazy linguistics nerd. I have like 3 different linguistics textbooks on my shelf, and So there's this thing called alignment, right? So English, like most languages, is a nominative accusative language. So you use the nominative form, like I, as the subject of transitive verbs. So like I throw the ball. The ball is the object, right? But also of intransitive verbs like sleep. I sleep. In an ergative absolutive, the person who does the thing or the thing that experiences the intransitive verb gets treated like an object. And then there isn't really necessarily an explicit subject to that sentence. And it can be hard to wrap your brain around if you haven't studied any ergative absolutive languages. I think the one that most people would have at least heard of is Basque in parts of Spain and France. Basque is a split ergative language, like almost all ergative absolutive alignment or ergative absolutive languages are. There are also some of the Caucasian languages use a split ergative alignment. So if you're, things like from the Caucasus Mountains, but it's by far the less common alignment system. Most of the languages that like all the Indo-European languages, all the Semitic languages, I believe all the Sino-Tibetan languages are all nominative accusative. So that's what that difference is there. So now let's talk about how Sumerian bothers to split those 2 patterns.
Yeah, so there are 2 verbal aspects. There's like a perfective and an imperfective aspect. And of course, when you teach it to like first year students, it's like past and present future. Those are the 2, and they call the past or the perfective hamtu for the Akkadian word, and then maru is the present future or the imperfective. So in the hamtu stem, the perfective, in all persons, first, second, third, the agent is always marked as the ergative and of a transitive verb, and the direct object is marked as the absolutive, and then in all persons the subject of an intransitive verb is marked in the absolutive, just like the direct object is.
Okay.
But in the maru, so they divide it based on the aspect.
That is a strange distinction. I've never heard that before.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting how it gets divided. Now, just as a side note for anybody watching, if I'm making Sumerian sound complicated or difficult to learn, rest easy if you're interested in learning it, because there are certain things that you don't have to know. Yeah, you don't have to think about too terribly much to learn the language. Like split ergativity is something that I don't talk about until book 2,
Okay.
which I just finished, because it's not something that the first year student needs to be bothered with, I don't think.
Yeah.
But
And I feel like in most cases you can just focus on transitive verbs where it's not going to matter anyway, because
yeah.
we have a couple of well, first we have a real quick question, and I think I know the answer. Vandali 1998, who is a channel member, thank you very much, says, does the American/English language have any ancestry or connection with the Mesopotamian languages, or they have totally separate lines of descent? I'm going to have to say that other than some borrowing of a few words here and there for explicitly Mesopotamian concepts, there's no real connection there. So,
I wouldn't think so.
English is an Indo-European language. So it is connected to languages that end up coming into the area later, like Persian, because Persian is an Indo-European language, or Hittite is an Indo-European language. So is Luwian. Okay, there's some debate as to whether Luwian is actually has an earlier ancestor in common with Indo-European languages than Proto-Indo-European, or whether it's actually a Proto-Indo-European language proper. So there's a little bit of back and forth on Luwian, and I don't know enough to have an opinion. I just know that it is connected. And their biggest reason for that is apparently Luwian doesn't bother with most of the common Indo-European aspectual distinctions in verbs. So they're like, well, then maybe it's from before those aspectual things which are common to Indo-European really developed. And it's a sister lineage, but I don't actually know enough about either Indo-European linguistics or Luwian in particular. So I'll just leave it. My Infinite Journey for $2 says, hi, Dr. Josh, what's happening?
Nice. Do you
not
get that?
It, no.
We have a so my wife is also an Assyriologist, and with our YouTube channel, she started a scholarship for PhD students in ancient Near Eastern studies, and she has a nonprofit now that she runs, and we call it HAPS. It's Humans Against Poor Scholarship. Yeah,
I did know that was a thing. I just didn't make the connection there. Okay,
right, yeah.
So for 50 Argentinian pesos, which I always have to remember what that one is because ARS does not say Argentinian pesos to me. Maybe if it was ARP, but then I guess that's whatever. It says, Sumerian and Mayan both exhibit split ergativity. Americo-Mediterranean connection confirmed. Mormons were right. I'm going to have to point out that split ergativity occurs in very, very different lineages. It's one of those things, it's just like some language families end up aligning nouns that way. Most don't. So JS asks, which of the Sumerian deities are first to be mentioned in the written records? Any idea how old that ancient religion might be?
Oh. So in the Ubaid period, we have a temple sequence that goes, I think there are 14 different rebuildings of a particular temple. And boy, I'm really digging deep back into grad school to remember this one. I had to write a paper on it. My first year, actually. And in one of the sequences, so they built this temple essentially on the same foundation.
Okay.
So it stayed in the same on the same foundation plan. And in one of the levels, and I don't remember which one, sorry, there's it looks like an altar that has burnt fish bones in it. And this is something that's sort of typical of Enki, worship of Enki. So I think they think it's a temple. They're pretty sure it's a temple. Of course, I haven't read the secondary literature on it recently, so maybe there's a different idea on that. But and it'd be the worship of Enki there. So I mean, I think the religious aspect of this goes back. Again, not my area of specialization.
Right.
uh, prehistorical, Mesopotamian deity worship. But so we see in the mythology, in the literary texts, like I know there's in the early dynastic period, there's an Inanna text, there's a Shamash text. I'd have to go back and think about all the documentation. I mean, all the literature that we have. But I mean, certainly, I would say, the Sumerian pantheon was worshipped. I mean, I would say at least. Maybe I should be careful what I say because I haven't thought about this directly, but without thinking about it directly and reading up, I would suspect it goes back to before, writing comes on the scene.
Right. Because it does seem like, from what little I know and from what you're saying, that once we start getting writings about deities, that there's a fairly reasonably well-established pantheon of gods with their stereotypical roles and worship rituals already in place, which would mean that presumably that kind of thing was happening before we start getting the texts.
I think Jakobsen, I think it was Torkeld Jakobsen, wrote a chapter. It might be in Treasures of Darkness. I'm not sure. Sorry, I didn't prepare for that.
Hey, no, I didn't know that question was coming either.
But I think it was Jakobsen that did, and he wrote basically about the development of how the gods were thought of, how they were conceived of. So like in the fourth millennium, he argues that they're thought of as, the sun, the storm cloud, the river. They're just the actual natural phenomena. And then, into the third millennium, they start to get more anthropomorphized. Into the second millennium, they get more personalized. So there's a development that you see having them, become more like us, as time goes by.
Okay. So I think I want to ask. Now, this might be a little bit more in terms of grammar, what people are familiar with. But how is the grammar? What's the grammar of Akkadian like? So it's a Semitic language, but I feel like most people probably don't know very much about how Semitic languages work. So I think one of the things we should talk about is the root system, because Semitic languages are weird with their roots in a way that I don't think anything else does. So does Akkadian use triliteral roots? And if so, what are those?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like Hebrew, or Arabic. Or there's most nouns, verbs. They're built on generally 3 letters,
which are always consonants.
Well, no.
Oh, okay.
I mean. Sorry. Yes, they're always one of the 22 or 23 consonants, but sometimes they're weak. So that's complicated. Certain letters can be, just like in English, like the letter Y. Sometimes it's a consonant, sometimes being used as a vowel. In that sense. So it's similar, but you have strong consonants, you have weak consonants. So sometimes they'll morph, sometimes they'll disappear, sometimes they'll drop out, sometimes they'll change their shape, which I guess is what morph means. But sorry, but basically you end up having three consonants, and so like katav, kaf, tav, bait. Yeah, to write.
My Arabic isn't failing me.
There you go. So, in Hebrew, you would say like katavti. So katav would be he wrote. Katavti would be I wrote. Yeah. Katavta would be you wrote, but you can hear katav, katav, katav. Yeah, and again, this is more for the...
Works similarly in Arabic, where kataba is he wrote and aktabu is I write.
So, but then you can have like michtav. So the ch sound is that cough sound, like writing, something written. I can't remember specifically what a michtav is. Might be a letter. I can't remember. But anyway, but again, it has to do with writing. Let's see. Trying to think of another common root that I could use to do different things, but it's changing the vowels and putting certain consonants before, usually, or sometimes
Right.
after, and that can, there are noun patterns, and of course there are verbal patterns, but they all, sort of are developed or built around this trilateral root, this three consonant root. And that's how the language, generally forms for nouns and verbs.
And that's one of those very distinctly Semitic languages things. You really don't get that outside of that language family, as far as I know. It's a very unusual feature, but it's just so widespread in Semitic languages. It's sort of like you see that and you're like, oh no, I know what language family we're dealing with. There's no question here.
Yeah.
So what kinds of things are going on in Akkadian verbs in terms of what's being grammaticized here?
Okay. You're challenging me today to pull these things from memory. Okay.
Like I said, this is a very linguistically nerdy stream, so sorry about that.
Yeah. No, it's okay. It's funny because as far as I never really enjoyed. This is gonna offend you, and I apologize.
Oh, I doubt it will offend me.
I was always really sort of bored with all the technical linguistic aspects. Like there was a like these articles that are written on modality and the different uses of this hatu prefix. The different, and it's like
I'm looking for a much higher level view than that. Like, are we doing
right.
tense and aspect? Is tense even really there, or is it just aspect? Or
yeah, I mean, I think it's more aspect.
Okay. That's pretty typical too.
Yeah, but it's marked for for person, for number, and it's first person common singular, first person common plural, but then second person masculine singular, second person feminine singular, third feminine, third masculine, and so on. So it divides up as it goes down. Whereas Sumerian, doesn't do that. It doesn't distinguish gender. What else? It has a durative. There's a durative form.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. God. So there are different verbal conjugations, like Hebrew, like Arabic. Of course, it's not as robust as Arabic. What does Arabic have? Like 14, I think, different verbal patterns.
It's a pretty high number. There's only a few that are common, but then you get the weird verbs here and there.
Yeah.
Now, this is a question about verbs that actually is common not just to Semitic languages, but you actually get it in other Afroasiatic languages, which is the larger group that Semitic is within. Can you mark the direct object of a verb with an enclitic pronoun, which, for people who might know, an enclitic pronoun is one that you just kind of stick onto the end of the word, and it functions like a pronoun, but it acts like a suffix in terms of how it gets tacked on?
Not... It's they have a case system. It's not an enclitic pronoun. Well, not the direct object, right? Okay. So they have a case system. So im, and am. So sharum would be the nominative. Sharim would be the genitive, and then sharam would be the accusative.
And is Akkadian strictly nominative accusative alignment language?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I would have expected, but
yeah. I think I've only ever thought about it with Sumerian, and probably because
it is strictly nominative accusative then.
Right.
As a native English speaker, you're only going to think about alignment when it's ergative absolutive, because that's when it's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what cases are we in? So we're getting a nominative, accusative, dative, genitive. What else we got?
Yeah, and they only specifically mark the three.
Okay.
But of course, the meanings, the nuances are built into like the accusative or built into the genitive. Like they can appear that way, but they don't separate them out. Like in Sumerian, you don't, Sumerian has the dative case and it has a terminative and it like
Right.
all separately marked. Whereas this is just how it's being used in the sentence.
Okay. Well, it sounds then like if you're familiar with any, with a lot of modern languages that are frequently spoken, that Akkadian is going to be more grammatically what you're used to than Sumerian, which is going to be
Yes.
a little on the weird side. Okay.
Yeah.
So, now I know that after about, like we said, after about like 500 to 800 years or so, Akkadian starts becoming a prominent language. If I remember correctly, it's Sumerian is centered more in the south and Akkadian more in the north. Is that roughly accurate?
Generally, I
Right.
think that's fair.
And so, am I correct that as time goes on, the Mesopotamia becomes sort of a bilingual society where there's a lot of intercourse back and forth between people who are Akkadian speakers versus Sumerian speakers, and a lot of people will end up learning both languages and things like that. So, is it accurate to say that over time we basically get a bilingual region to a large extent?
Yeah, and of course, and I've never thought about that specifically from that angle. Like the who's, I mean, certainly these are not everybody's reading and writing, right? So,
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think certainly I think those languages are known. Certainly, Sumerian is a living language. Down probably to the end of the Ur III period, end of the third millennium, and then after that, Sumerian is really only in the elite scholarly circles.
Sort of becomes like Latin in the Middle Ages.
Yes, that's
Okay.
exactly right.
So,
Yeah.
what is it that causes Sumerian to go away? Because there is a difference there with Latin, where Latin never really went away. It just eventually evolved to no longer be mutually intelligible, so people just fell back on that classical standard. Whereas Sumerian does seem to have just... I mean, there's no modern descendant languages. There's no current population of people speaking a language that descends directly from Sumerian.
Yeah. That's a complicated question that I don't know that I know the answer to. And the reason that I say that is it's debated when it died.
Okay.
I think, and again, I haven't read through all the secondary literature on this recently, but I know that somebody like Gonzalo Rubio would argue that it dies by the end of the third millennium. And by the time you get to that explosion of Sumerian literature in the beginning of the second millennium, that that it's already a dead language.
Right. That's now just a literary language for the elites.
Yeah, literary, liturgical, that sort of thing. But why specifically? I mean, I don't. My guess would be that it's just Akkadian became so overwhelmingly popular or
Right.
used, and I suspect because it's it's a hell of a lot easier to learn.
Yeah, well, that is actually one of the things I want to talk about, is that a lot of the surrounding languages that are in the region are either related to Akkadian by being Semitic or more broadly Afro-Asiatic like Egyptian, or at the very least the grammar is more similar, because while there's no known connection between, say, Semitic languages or Afro-Asiatic languages and Indo-European, grammatically they're not dramatically different. They have they categorize things into a lot of the same kinds of boxes in terms of grammar. So do you think that was an influence? It was just like, look, if you speak Egyptian, you're going to have an easier time learning to speak Akkadian than Sumerian. Yeah,
I mean, I suspect, again, this is not a professional opinion.
Right.
But yes, I mean, given my experience, that sounds probably fairly reasonable.
Okay. So now this is something that I know that you did a lot of work on. So let's say I'm a relatively well-off kid in some Mesopotamian city, and maybe I'm not the oldest kid. Maybe there's going to be some problems if we split up the land this many ways. So it's like, you know what, Dapper, you're going to go learn to be a scribe. So I go off to Scribal school. What's going on there? How's that good process? How old am I? How long does it take? All that stuff. Give us a rundown.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to know. I think it's difficult to know exactly, when kids would start that, if there is some standardized time the kids would start. We have some literary texts. There's one called School Days, which is a really fun text. It's probably describing, I think most scholars would say that it's describing schooling in the Or III period, which is a highly bureaucratized.
Okay, that's a word. I'm pretty sure bureaucratized is a word.
It?
I think it is.
Let's go with that.
Yeah,
a very bureaucratic system. Let's say that. It sounds better. But the way that it describes it as a much more standardized classroom setting that we would expect. So it talks about a little boy that gets up and he goes to school and he does his writing exercises, and it's from his point of view. And he says, I did my exercises and I didn't do them really well, and so he caned me. I got caned, and I raised my hand, or I spoke without raising my hand, and I got caned. And
so
I went out in the hallway without permission.
Raising your hand and not to speak and needing permission to go out of the hallway is something that goes back for 5,000-6,000 years, apparently. That's a schooling tradition from the dawn of time.
Yeah, it seems like it's a pretty standard thing.
Okay. It's good to know that's been the way schools have worked since forever.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting because the text goes on to talk about he goes home and he says to his mother, can you pack me my lunch for tomorrow? Make sure you wake me up early so that I'm not late. I mean, it's very familiar when you read it.
Yeah.
But most of the evidence, the archaeological evidence and textual evidence that we have for scribal education comes from this period called the Old Babylonian period, which is, the first half of the second millennium BCE. And it doesn't come from these large, really, state-run or whatever, large organizations, large buildings. It comes from houses, seemingly private houses.
Okay.
And so what it seems like is that it became, from the evidence that we have, it seems like it was a much more local thing. So you had a father and he might train his son, or maybe his son and some other, kids from the town or whatever. It's not unified. The information that we have is not unified. Certainly as time goes by, later texts from the first millennium seem to kind of harken back to that. At least in certain cities, much more widespread scribal education. But basically, the thing that we can say a lot about is what it is that they studied, how they learned.
Okay.
And I wrote a book, is a popular level publication of my dissertation, which talks about scribal schooling and how that later affected the way that priests prayed for their communities. So I wrote a book about that, learning to pray in a dead language. But basically what they did is they started off, of course, just so everybody knows,
we're getting visual aids.
Well, yeah.
Awesome.
So here's of course, these are all replicas, right? They're not real, but that's a cuneiform tablet. So I mean, you can, you've got, something like this, and they would take of course, I don't have a pen or anything here, but they would take a stylus, like a reed stylus, and you can probably, I mean, if you YouTube how to write in cuneiform, I'll show you.
There are actually
how they do it.
Very relaxing videos of people pressing a stylus into clay and then to make some cuneiform and then firing it. So
there's a guy named Jeremiah Peterson who's incredibly talented sumerologist, who has an Etsy store.
Oh, cool.
And he made this for us, and it's an amulet. You can see the little hole up
you
here.
can put a string through there.
Yeah, they would have worn it around the neck. But anyway, but what's it called? It's called, if I mention it, I got to remember what the name is. It's called like Modern Scribe, Ancient Text, Modern Scribe, something like that. Anyway, Megan would know. But basically what they did is they started off just sort of learning how to make wedges, right? How to form the wedges. So do vertical, and they would repeat them, right? And the instructor would have them repeat it. Then they started copying out sign lists. And so there were certain signs, and they would just learn how to write them out. And they didn't necessarily mean anything. It was just learning how to, form the actual signs. And again, they'd repeat them out.
Sort of like getting some muscle memory for this is how you make the sign.
Yeah, I mean, it's like copying out the alphabet, right? It's more complex than that, but just write out your ABCs. So it's sort of like that. But then they started doing things like copying out lists of vocabulary, lists of like different names of rocks, different names of trees, different names of stars, different professions. They would trying to think of all the different lists but lists of words that are in legal text, lists of words that are
so sort of like a
like divine name lists,
word lists.
That's right.
Okay.
And what they would do is they would memorize these things. And this isn't one, but what they would do is they would have a tablet like this, and the instructor would draw a line down the center.
Mm-hmm.
And on the left side, you had this, we have them, right? We have these tablets extant, and you would have this really nice list, like a wood list, tree list or something.
Okay.
Over here on the left. And if you look at it from the side, this side would be nice and thick, the normal width of the original form. And then over here, this is where the student was supposed to copy it out. And then what they would do is they would erase it and do it again. So if you turn it to the side, this would be really, really thin.
Because it keeps getting erased.
Right? That's right. They keep erasing it down. So then on the back, there was the student would write out the last set of things that they had learned from the previous tablet.
Okay.
Right. So let's say this is, I know this is a little detail, but it's important for what I'm getting ready to say. So let's say this is the sign list for trees, and it's lines 1 through 10. Or lines 11 through 20, let's say.
Sure.
So you copy out and you memorize lines 11 through 20 of this standardized sort of tree list. Well, if you find this tablet, you would flip it over and you would see lines 1 to 10 on the back. And there was a guy named Nick Veldhuis, an Assyriologist, and what he did is he studied all these tablets that came from this Scribal education place in Nippur, city of Nippur. And he was able to, doing things like this, reconstruct the actual sequence of the curriculum.
Oh, wow.
And so we know it in a fair amount of detail. So they copied out signs, they practiced their signs, then they did sign lists, then they did these lists of vocabulary, then they would do things like they would write out proverbs, so these short little sentences that had just a little bit of grammar, a little bit of syntax, but it wasn't like these full, multiple line things. There's individual little statements. They would write out model contracts. They would write out model letters. They'd learn to memorize it. They'd memorize all these. What else? They would do mathematical texts.
Okay.
And then eventually they would work up to full literary texts.
Okay.
And they would memorize them a quarter, essentially, like roughly a quarter of the text, a quarter of a composition at a time. And they would copy them out on these longer single column texts, front and back. They would write out from memory a quarter of the composition. And then once they learned, like, let's say they're memorizing a text called Shulgi A, it's a hymn to the king Shulgi. They learned lines 1 to 25. I'm just pulling these numbers out.
Right.
And on tablet 1. And then once they memorized that, then they got a new tablet and they memorized lines 26 to 50. And then once they memorized that and they could do it from memory, then they did, 51 to 75. And then the final one would be 76 to 100. This is really taxing my brain.
All these numbers.
And right. And then at the end, once they had the whole thing memorized, they would take a multi-column tablet and they would copy the whole thing out from memory. And we have all of these.
Oh, wow.
We have all these tablets, yeah.
I guess it's a nice thing about writing on clay. It tends to last a while after you fire it.
Yeah, there's a somebody wrote a book recently. It's one of these Christian apologists. Can't remember. Oh, it was the detective guy. Damn it, what's his name? Cold case detective guy. Shit. Anyway, because a friend of mine, Jim Majors, Dr. Jim, was sending me screenshots of the book, and it was like, unfortunately, in the ancient Near East, when they wrote on clay, it's such perishable material.
What?
It wasn't until they got to papyrus that it was, that's when we start getting those things preserved. I'm like,
no.
What's that now?
That's the...
You're not much of a detective there, guy.
Yeah. I mean, look, don't get me wrong. Papyrus is a really durable material as far as, compared to, say, like modern paper. Like, it's very tough and, it decays fairly slowly, especially in arid environments. But, compared to fired clay, no, man. Fired clay is going to be way more durable.
Just so, why can't I remember his name? It's so terrible. I'm sure people are saying it in the side chat now, but just, in case he's listening.
Warner Wallace?
There you go, J. Warner Wallace. I think that's who it was.
Right as you said, people are saying it in chat. It came in twice.
Just so he knows, we have 500,000 cuneiform tablets preserved, extant. From, and they're not copies of they're the original.
Yeah, and you have
just so he knows,
and you have these these relatively throwaway things, some students exam, who cares to preserve that? Well, if you fire it, even if you don't care to preserve it, it's not going anywhere anytime soon because it's
and they would use they would use these things in secondary or even tertiary contexts to to build things, right? So there are benches in buildings at Nippur that when they started to dig down through them, benches have tons of clay tablets in them.
I mean,
because it's clay.
Yeah, you might as well use it.
Might as well use it. So
it's your building and your writing material. So
yeah. So but yeah, that's sort of the sequence. And so they would learn these simple signs, and they would learn these lists, and they'd learn these different model types of contracts, and then they'd work their way up to these long literary texts. And it's really interesting to see from city to city, and we have evidence from different cities Nippur, Or, Sippar, Kish, Isin. We have these scribal education context from the early second millennium, and you can see a fair amount of consistency between them.
Okay.
And so the differences are the things that are notable. Certain cities, like Nippur doesn't have a lot of Akkadian in its scribal education, in its curriculum. And it's not because they didn't know Akkadian. It's because, of course, they knew Akkadian. At Nippur, this was scribal elite central. Obviously, they know Akkadian. They're there to become Sumerian masters, right?
Got it.
Whereas in my city, where I wrote my dissertation from the city of Kish, you have a lot more Akkadian. You still have tons of Sumerian, they're still having to learn Sumerian, but it's not like the elite. It's not like the elite Scribal education area. So you have to teach them a lot more Akkadian. It's like, Nippur would be like, I don't know, like the Harvard or whatever.
Okay.
So yeah, it's interesting how that works out.
Well, that's pretty cool. So one question that I would like to have is there a lot of development in terms of changes in orthography, grammar, or vocabulary across the history of these languages? Because these are languages that are spanning a very long time, and it's sort of like if you go back just a few thousand years, Greek becomes very different from modern Greek, and same thing with English. If you just go back, 1,000 years, English becomes unintelligible unless you study it like a foreign language. So, to what extent is that happening with Akkadian and Sumerian?
So Sumerian stays pretty. I mean, I always when I do these languages, I always tend to focus on the things that stay the same, and it's because my brain is geared to see the consistency.
Right.
So like when I started to have to dig into textual developments or looking at later manuscripts in Hebrew to try to figure out, or to make arguments for when those texts probably date to based on their orthography. Then I had to really start thinking about where do they differ. And I hadn't really done that. I think it's a special gift.
Yeah, it's not
people
easy.
have. They can do that naturally. So certainly, like taking Akkadian is something that there are dialects. I can think of. So you have Sargonic Akkadian, you have Old Assyrian, you have Middle Assyrian, you have Neo Assyrian. And those go from the third millennium, early second millennium, late second millennium, first millennium, and then you have Old Babylonian, Middle Babylonian, Neo Babylonian, which again are beginning of the second millennium, middle of the second millennium, late second. I mean, in the first millennium, and those you have different vowel changes in various places, some shifts in consonants. But again, in very specific places, but it's all Akkadian, right? I mean, like you can, and if you can read one dialect, it doesn't take much,
right,
to shift to read the others. Sumerian, and again, this is not my area of expertise. Like I don't want anybody to be fooled. As I've said already, this linguistic aspect of it, nailing down, fine tuning.
Like
distinctions.
I said,
I mean, I could talk
a
about
broad sort of thing. We don't need every detail.
Sumerian, when you get down into the first millennium, Sumerian starts to get a little weird in that it seems like they've lost a lot of how it actually went together grammatically. So you start to see some odd forms that show up, and it's again, I think it's because they're not 100% sure how it goes together. And it's because it's been a dead language for so long.
Right.
That it they lost that. But again, it was, there's definitely a fixed tradition, a much more canonized tradition, particularly in the liturgies, that those things sort of get standardized. But again, later Sumerian gets kind of weird. That's not terribly detailed what I mean by weird, but like
that's okay.
Plural endings start to seem strange. The way that the verbs go together seems kind of strange. It seems like it takes on some Akkadian aspects to it, or some Akkadian influence.
That doesn't seem too surprising if it's mostly Akkadian speakers who are just writing in Sumerian. Okay. So the last question I'm going to ask before we just kind of throw open whatever questions people have about whatever topic that is at least somewhat on topic, right? Like if you don't ask me about the new Spinosaurids on this stream, guys. Wait for another stream to ask me about the new Spinosaurids. So can you give us like a very abridged version of how is it that archaeologists and linguists and whatnot end up deciphering cuneiform, because that's not a small task to come upon these obscure wedge shapes that are in densely packed little columns and rows, and getting from that to, no, I know what this says, I know how it was pronounced, and I can read this text. How's that go?
Yeah, it was quite a process. Megan did a video on this on our channel. I'll be damned if I can remember what it is.
But the channel is linked in the description, everybody, so check it out.
But yeah, if you like origin maybe of cuneiform or decipherment of cuneiform, maybe she put in the title. I don't remember. A lot of it had to do, as you might expect if you know about it, which again, not my area of expertise, but proper nouns.
Yeah.
With proper nouns, if you have a language that you know, and you start to see in a particular text a repeated, I mean, it was a very complicated process, obviously, but you start to see like repeated patterns. They started to identify, okay, that's like somebody's name, it appears, and then they determine, well, like we know in all these other languages that has an A-E pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And so, proper nouns tend to maintain those patterns better than other nouns. And so they started to be able to make connections like that. And of course, because Akkadian was a Semitic language, Akkadian came first. Then you have a lot of bilingual texts in Sumerian and Akkadian.
Right.
So that's a lot of the way that we get at least some of the way that we get at the grammar of Sumerian. Some of it comes from these grammatical texts where you have one column that has like a Sumerian form, verbal form, and then you have the Akkadian equivalent, or what they consider to be at that point the Akkadian equivalent over in the other column.
Right.
And so you can start to see the paradigms as they're setting them up. But yeah, like these vocabulary lists are often in bilingual form. So you have a column with the Sumerian and then the column with the Akkadian translation. And so that allowed sort of like a key, for them to be able to start unlocking what these Sumerian texts were saying. But again, I would encourage everybody to go look for that video. I should probably just find it and email you the link.
Well, there's an easy way. Just everyone go after this to Digital Hammurabi. It's linked, and just watch all the videos.
There you go. That's what I'm talking about.
Problem solved.
If you want to learn Sumerian, we have free classes. I mean, come on. All the videos are there. It's oddly enough, I mean, you won't consider this odd, right? But other people did. Certainly I did. The Learn to Read Ancient Sumerian is by probably a factor of 5 the most popular video series on our channel.
Well, I know I've seen a fair few of those, and I was fascinated by it. So,
I mean, like, I think that Learn to Read Ancient Sumerian lesson 1 has been viewed like 115,000 times. I mean,
nice.
After that, I think the next video I think we might have one up around 40,000 or 50,000.
Yeah.
It was just crazy. It's crazy.
So now we're going to get into the audience questions. I know that I've missed a few because, during the main discussion portion, if there isn't a great way to segue to it, I'm just going to hold off on it. So sorry about that, guys. But this is the main question section. Of course, if you do bother to super chat, that will put you at the top of the list. And if your chat scrolls past me and I don't get it because I'm doing something else, you might just want to resend it. I don't mind. If you're not super chatting, please do tag @DapperDino so that, I get that little orange box so that my eye actually notices it. Because once we're doing questions, it's very hard for me to read most of the chat. So Beach Price asks, any evidence of slang being used? Presumably in Akkadian Sumerian.
Slang. There are texts that I have not worked on, at least in any detail, that a colleague of mine, friend of mine, Yana Matuszek, works on. She's a Sumerologist, Syriologist out in London. No, where's she at now? She's moved around quite a bit. Anyway, I worked with her out in Tübingen, and when I got my Fulbright scholarship to go out there, and she works on their the debate between two women. There are these
That's the
debate.
name of a text.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
There are several of them. Lots of these debates, and basically, it's where two people, or like you can have a hoe and a plow are debating with one another. A bird and a fish are debating with one another.
Interesting.
And basically, yeah, and by the way, everybody, you can go read a lot of these things in English translation for free on ETCSL. It's the Electronic Text Corpus of Sumerian Literature, ETCSL. If you just Google ETCSL Sumerian, it'll come up. And they're categorized. You can read them. I'd say the majority of Sumerian literature is on there in English translation and in Sumerian, if you're learning Sumerian. But in these debates, like they're not like debates, like about a topic or something necessarily. They're insulting one another.
Okay.
Right? Like,
okay.
Like, bird, what good are you? You walk around the courtyard all day pooping on everything, and then like, fish, what good are you? Or plow, you're the wooden teeth of whatever part of the plow is, they break off and they're worthless, and the hoe is like, or the plow is like, well, hoe, you can only do this little bit of work anyway. So you have debates between scribes. So like scribes making fun of each other.
Okay.
So I would imagine if there is slang, and again, I haven't looked into that specifically, it's probably that it would show up there in those insults. But Yana Matuszek is somebody that you could, I'm trying to remember how to spell her last name. It's Mateuchek. Damn it, I can't do that from memory. Sorry. But anyway, yeah, she's written on this pretty extensively.
Well, that's cool. Those sound like some fun texts, actually.
They are fun. Lots of fun.
Ugly German Truths asks if you can tell a joke in Sumerian. If you can, you might also want to translate it for us.
I mean, I wouldn't be able to do it in Sumerian. And actually, I don't remember. The only joke that I remember is from Natan Wasserman put a publication out of a bunch of one, what he called joke tablet. It's like joke/riddles. I think it's in Akkadian. Actually, I don't think it's in Sumerian. But it says, how does it go? The deflowered girl did not become pregnant. The undeflowered girl became pregnant. Who or what is it? Auxiliary forces.
All right. Robert Adsit asks, I don't think I heard, how do we know how Sumerian was pronounced?
Very complicated. So part of my dissertation deals with this. And actually, if you're interested, in that book that I published of the dissertation, I have a chapter on what are called unorthographic writings. That sounds really complicated, but it's basically when they're writing out words and spelling them, how they sound rather than how they're actually spelled. So if I spell dogs unorthographically, I would spell it D-O-G-Z.
Right.
Because that's how it sounds. Anyway, so I have a bunch of texts that are spelled the way that they sound, not the way that they're actually spelled in Sumerian, and why they are that way. But some of that's one of the ways among many, not the primary way, but just the one that came to mind first, that you can get at how it sounded, because they're writing them out phonetically. A lot of it has to do, again, with thinking about things like like bilingual texts. And if we, particularly again with proper nouns, if we know how that proper noun, like that city name was pronounced, or that person, that king's name was pronounced, and you see it patterned, in a pretty consistent pattern, consonant and vowel here, and then in this other language, and we know these, and then we see it in a bilingual text here with the Sumerian, and you see it in different places where it seems to be consistent. That gives you ideas. But I mean, like, don't be fooled. Pascal Oettinger, who is down in Switzerland, I think that's where he's at. Yeah, I think that's where he's at. It's terrible. I can't remember that. But he's a Sumerologist, probably one of the gods in the field. But he put a whole sign list together with Katharina Mittermeier, and basically they went through, and in a lot of these sign values, how these signs are supposed to be read, pronounced, whatever, they changed a lot of the vowels, because he made arguments that it shouldn't be a U vowel here, it should be an I vowel here, it shouldn't be an A vowel, it should be an E vowel, or whatever. So that sort of stuff is not fixed in any way. It's not settled. I think there's very broad consistency, but a lot of those things are still debated for this reason.
Okay. Smitty would like to know if you're familiar with the joke, what has not happened since time immemorial, that a young wife has not farted in her husband's lap?
We have a T-shirt. We have a T-shirt with that proverb. It's I mean, I didn't know. I don't know if I consider it a joke, but it's a proverb, and we have on our Teespring. I think you got the cuneiform on the front, and then the translation on the back. I think that's how Megan set it up. But yeah, it's a really cool proverb.
Okay. I just had a question that I can't remember it because too much happened. Oh my goodness, what was it? I suppose it doesn't matter a whole lot. John B for $5 asks, is it worth testing the hypothesis that climate-driven social collapse shifted the dominance in one language family versus another in Mesopotamia?
I
mean, I usually say that hypotheses are generally worth testing, but...
Yes, absolutely. I'm trying to think of what that shift would have done to affect.
Well, I think this might be in relation to the evidence for climate change around the Bronze Age, the late Bronze Age collapse.
Yeah.
Was Sumerian, is that already extinct by then?
Yeah, this would have been like the early Bronze Age, into the third millennium. And there was certainly you can see it pretty clearly, I think, in Canaanite culture, but I think you see it over in Mesopotamia as well. I'd have to think about that. That's not something I'd be able to comment on off the top of my head, but I think that'd be worth looking into.
Smitty asks,
and maybe people have. I just don't know.
Okay. Smitty asks, what was the language that proverb was originally in? Like, what, if you have that shirt, what language
Sumerian.
is that? Okay, Sumerian.
It's in Sumerian, yeah.
Okay.
And there are lots of Sumerian proverbs on that ETCSL website, so you can go read them. This long list of proverbs.
Okay, I'm not probably going to get this name wrong, so forgive me in advance. As I always say to anyone, if you're worried about me getting your name right, one option is always to just type it out in the International Phonetic Alphabet and send it to me that way, and then I'll almost certainly get it right. But I'm going to go with Volander Gingerson. Sorry. Any advice on approaching fringe and pseudo-archaeological claims? So I think actually we might both have something to say on that.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
So I actually, when I was getting my degree, one of the first classes I took was actually, Principles of a Historical Method. And one of the things that we did was an exercise in take a look at something that is sort of widely got wrong in terms of pseudo-history, right? And so one of the things that I did was I took a look at a wall mural from Egypt that a lot of ancient astronaut types like to think is evidence of light bulbs in Egypt, because of course, why not, right? So I sat down there with my Egyptian grammar and dictionary, and I just translated the wall, and I was like, no, this is a boring description of, like, there's some creation myth stuff here, there's some talking about various cities in the region here, and this picture of the supposed light bulb is labeled, like it's got a label on it. We can tell what it is. It just says it.
Yeah.
And so my thing for that is, while it might be too much for you to learn the original languages to get at the primary sources yourself, take a look at what the scholarly consensus is for the translations of these things, and they're not going to match most of the pseudo-archaeological type stuff. Like, if you look at, like, say, Zachariah Sitchin, like we talked about earlier, he clearly doesn't actually know Akkadian or Sumerian. He probably has looked up a few signs in, like, a dictionary here or there, and then he's making these, like, weird associations about them and making etymological fallacies, but even worse, like, argument from orthography, which is not how any language works. And so, like, yeah, it's sort of like he's making arguments like an English equivalent would be like, oh, the word for the water that comes out of your eye when you're sad is related in meaning to what you do when you rip pieces of paper apart and you tear them. Like, no, it's not.
Exactly.
You can't make that association. And so what I would say is, get that scholarly consensus. And if you can, I mean, if you have the time and the inclination, feel free to learn ancient languages. They can be fun.
Yeah, sure. And we've got several videos on our channel. Like, we had David Anderson come on to talk about the Ancient Aliens thing pretty early on. But, like, we went through Zachariah Sitchin's 12th Planet and put a presentation together, sort of explaining why it's problematic. So I'm sure there are lots of archaeological channels
I love that word.
That deal with this sort of thing.
Problematic.
What's that?
It's the word problematic always seems so understated. It's like, Zachariah Sitchin is problematic, when it's like, no, that's just academics speak for, like, he's absolutely batshit crazy and no one should ever listen to him.
I mean, I think that's fair. Yeah. I mean, when you argue that the Mu is a rocket ship, Sorry. I see. The thing is, what's problematic? What's difficult about this is, and like, until I got out of grad school, until I got my degree, I'd never heard of Zachariah Sitchin. I mean, we started the YouTube channel, and like a couple streams in, people are like, "So, what do you think about Zachariah Sitchin?" Who the hell is that?
Yeah.
Oh my God, you do Sumerian and you don't know who Zachariah Sitchin is?
That's exactly why you don't know, because you actually do real work.
Exactly.
It's the same.
So
I do a lot of content about creationism, especially young Earth creationism, and it's the same thing. Like, if you ask the average, like, geologist or evolutionary biologist or something, like, oh, so what do you think about, that this paper from the Answers Research Journal? There's, I don't know, what is the Answers Research Journal? Like, what are you talking about? Yeah, Andrew Snelling said this about the Grand Canyon. It's like, who is Andrew Snelling and why do I care?
New phone, who dis?
Right, exactly. Because the thing is, real scholars and real scientists are actually doing work. And it's like, you don't have time to listen to people who think that, like, there's an orbitally impossible extra planet that every once in a while approaches Earth, and aliens from there came to Earth to get the gold so it could fix their atmosphere. It's like, none of this makes sense. It's physically impossible. There's no evidence for it. We got work to do, guys. Let's actually translate this new finding, right?
Like, let me tell you a story very, very quickly. I guess it was 3 years ago now. We were out at a departmental dinner. Megan and I were out after a lecture, and I was sitting at a table with my old archaeology professor and his husband, and I can't remember who else was at the table with us, a Hebrew Bible scholar. And my archaeologist professor's husband is like a high-level astronomer. I can't remember where he teaches, but brilliant. I mean, like, brilliant. And he was talking about this I don't know. It was some device that was up in space and it was getting ready to come back. And it was gathering data, being outside of the atmosphere, actually out in space, it can gather all this data on planetary and star alignments and all this stuff. Again, I don't have a lot of experience with astronomy, so forgive me that I'm butchering all of that. And he was saying that it was just going to be, people were presenting because it was getting ready to come back into orbit. I mean, into the atmosphere the next day or something. It was like really soon. And he said, so people all that day had been going and presenting their papers, trying to get them all presented at a conference because they were all going to be obsolete when this new data came out. And I looked at him after telling this story and I said, it's funny. We just started this YouTube channel and it's funny to hear people that think the earth is flat. And there was just silence. And he looked at me and he said, nobody thinks that. And I said, oh, yeah. Oh, yes, they do. He said, how?
That reminds me.
They do.
I've, as far as I know, I've done 2 flat Earth debates, and I did one solo. It was against Flat Earth Aussie. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's an Australian bloke with a really big beard, and so he's Australian. And of course, the standard flat Earth models has the sun going basically the wrong way if you're in the southern hemisphere. So I didn't bother with trying to argue for the globe. I was just like, I put the South Pole at the center of my flat Earth model. Prove me wrong, because it works better from your sky. And he had no idea how to deal with it, and it's just like, yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, the best he could do was like, that's a ridiculous model, and I'm like, you're right, it is a ridiculous model. Exactly. But it's just a mirror version of yours. It works just as well.
That's so funny.
Oh yeah, I was just tired of.
There was one debate that I watched.
The same way.
It was a couple years ago, and I don't have a science background at all, but I remember like a point of contention was apparently that you couldn't. Why can't you get a flight from? Where was it? It was from I don't know. Was it from Australia to somewhere in South America? Something like that. I can't remember. But it was
2 southern hemisphere cities, right?
Yeah, you can't get it. How come you can't get it? And like all you hear is the keyboard
check
on the other end.
right there. Yeah, I remember that.
He said, yeah. So I got a flight leaving May 7th. It's for $1,800. If you use that one, or do you want to go out on the 12th? It was so funny.
Yeah, that's always fun.
Oh shit!
My goodness, let me double check to make sure I didn't miss any questions while we were having fun talking about pseudoscience. Yes, Ugly German Truth. Sitchin is the Nibiru guy. Yeah, that's. So the thing that I love about that is it's crazy every way you look at it. So it's crazy in that none of this is in the texts, right? Like you have to just make this up. But it's also crazy in that like the physics doesn't work. Like you can't actually get a planet that does that then stays like as part of the solar system long term. It would get ejected out of the solar system, or it would get a circularized orbit. Like those are the only options. And so it can't keep coming past Earth every 11,000 or whatever years. That's not a stable configuration. And so like
it's just because you're part of the Illuminati.
Well, obviously. I mean, have you seen if you've seen my intro, I mean, there is an indication that I'm actually a paid shield for the United States Geological Survey. Just saying.
Well, people talk about this Mushkushu dragon behind me all the time. I'm part of the Illuminati. I'm a Freemason or something.
Yeah, because why wouldn't a Assyriologist have something from like the Ishtar Gate on his background? That's crazy talk.
Come on.
That makes no sense at all.
That's an odd thing to say.
Let's see. The Venom Lead asks, how did the Agutians and other invaders affect the Mesopotamian languages?
I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that.
I mean, that's fine. Look, no one can know everything, even within the field broadly that's their field. So please don't feel bad that, because here's the thing, right? in a stream like this, we're going to get questions from all over various aspects about like Assyriology, Sumerology, all this stuff. So, I mean, yeah, look, people ask me questions about dinosaurs all the time, and I'm like, I don't know that off the top of my head. It's like, how tall was this genus of dinosaur? It's like, I don't know. I don't have a chart of every dinosaur with their estimated height.
6'3",
right?
Every time.
Yeah, so don't worry about that. I think we all get that. But actually, we're coming up on it. We've been here an hour and 50, and I think it's a pretty good time to start wrapping things up. So,
Yeah.
I'd like to ask, what is coming up, if anything, on your channel? What can people look forward to if they go subscribe?
Megan has been doing, so I don't know if everybody knows, Megan gave birth to twins at the end of May,
Congratulations.
and they were preemies. Thank you. So we now have 5 children in our house.
Wow.
So this is a busy place. Video uploads have been slower, but she has been working on, she got a machine that does, it burns wood.
Okay, yeah.
But does it, yeah, I can't remember what the thing's called, but like I don't have one here, but well, here, like she made a cuneiform
in 3D.
Christmas ornament. Anyway, sorry. So she's been working on that sort of stuff. She just put so that she's putting an Etsy store together, which is going to be linked up in the channel.
That's really cool.
Of course, I just finished volume 2 of the Learn to Read Ancient Sumerian book, and she's working on editing that. Once that happens, then she will use that to make the second series of Learn to Read Ancient Sumerian free videos.
And that the first book is linked in the description. You can go there right to the Amazon page. So go ahead, guys, if you're interested.
I appreciate that. And the book has extra exercises. It actually has some extra discussions, grammatical discussions. So if you can't afford the book, the video series will get you really far. There's no question about that. But like the book has exercises that have like stuff like that in them.
Okay.
And then like detailed answer keys and explanations of all the grammatical forms, all that stuff. So I think it's worth it to get. But yeah, so that's coming up. She just did a lecture where talking about different aspects of Mesopotamian culture. So I think she's going to make that into a video. But we have scholars come on a couple times a month to present their research or to, just talk about something interesting live. So yeah, definitely come on. But I mean, I think the neat thing about our channel is that we have a very broad range of ancient Near East and Hebrew Bible stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's in playlists. So if you're interested in stuff like did the prophecy against Tyre, Ezekiel 26 fail, we've got a video on that. Or if you're interested in what was, life like in ancient Mesopotamia, we got a video series on that. So anyway.
Yeah, it wasn't much of a topic today, but I do want to point out that Dr. Josh has a book, which again, linked in the description, which is, make sure I get this right, it's the Atheist Guide to the New Testament? Or Old Testament.
Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament,
yeah. For some reason, guide and handbook in my brain for book titles are just interchangeable words. There you go. The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, that is linked. The Amazon link is that. Those aren't affiliate links, by the way. I'm not making any money off this. I'm just saying. This is my guest. If you want to go shove some of your money at him to get his products that he has made as scholarly resources for you, they are linked. I made it easy for you. I also want to point out that Apricot Sloth said in the chat, come on, everyone knows that big Assyriology pays trillions to cover up the truth with a capital T. I'm sure.
Oh, snap.
I'm sure that
coming out.
It is a guaranteed way to become fabulously wealthy is to go into Assyriology.
You don't even know. I mean, it's scary when you go in and apply. I mean, I remember my professor saying to me, look, you're probably going to get in, but it's really, really difficult, and you probably won't get a job.
Yeah,
It's like,
that's
no, thanks.
yeah.
It's getting better, I think. And honestly, I think a lot of it has to do with channels like yours, channel like ours, where we're taking interested, intelligent audiences and saying, "Hey, this stuff's actually pretty cool."
Yeah.
And then they go, "Damn, I'd like to do that." See, that's the thing. When people are interested and they want to go read cuneiform, for example, guess what? Now you need more professors to teach it. Now you need more, space in the buildings, need more funding, and that's when it grows. So yeah, I think, and that's when jobs open up, right? Now, man, now we got lots of people, so now we need more professors. So
There you go.
yeah, I'm excited about the work that's being done.
That's awesome.
So
All right, well, I'm going to give a little bit of update on what's going on here on this channel, and then we're going to get out of here. So if you guys are watching this live, which, I mean, everyone here in chat is, but hello to all the future people. This is old news. You could probably just turn off the video now. But let's see. Later on today, I'm going to be definitely not going on Cheshire Vic's channel to talk about panspermia and abiogenesis. I'm definitely not doing that in like a couple hours, I think. So don't look for me there, because I would never appear on her channel, ever. I never have, I never will. Also, I have a nice bridge over in Brooklyn that I would love to sell you. Email me for details. Let's see. Tomorrow is nothing. I'm just going to be taking the entire day off. You can try to contact me. No guarantee I'll even get back to you. But then Monday is going to be a pretty busy day for Dapper Dino. So there's going to be at 11 a.m. Pacific, which is 2 p.m. Eastern, there's going to be a debate with Finding Truth, a Muslim apologist, and Dr. Danster Cardinal, a evolutionary biologist who focuses his research on viruses. And they're going to be debating whether or not evolution can produce novel features. I will be hosting an after show about a half hour or so after that ends. There's a provisional time for it up on the channel now. Don't expect that to change, basically. And then around 4 p.m. Pacific, which is 7 p.m. Eastern, I will be not playing Dungeons & Dragons, which will not be streamed to Cheshire Vic's channel, because, again, I wouldn't appear there. And I won't be playing a dwarf artificer named Voldrin. None of that will happen. Then, let's see. Then that Tuesday will be another Kent with Bent, which is where we drink alcohol and debunk Kent, because Kent is so low-level trash that even if you're completely blitzed, you can still make very good debunking of his stuff. Which, I don't know, maybe sometime if you're interested, Dr. Josh, we can have you on there, because I hear that you have a pretty good impression of of Kent Ovent.
Sometimes. I might be able to get him over here to end the show if you want me to. When you're ready to end, maybe I can get him over here to say a couple words.
All right. Maybe he can say a couple words about his recent conviction.
I don't know if he wants to talk about that.
Yeah,
sure.
So that's Tuesday. Thursday, there's already the scheduled video about answers in Genesis. I don't think anything's happening Saturday, mostly because I'm just doing a lot today, and doing a lot Monday, so Saturday is probably just not going to happen. Then the next week, I will be gone. I will be on vacation. If you're going to contact me, it better be important, or I'm going to ignore it. But I do have a pre-recorded Kent with Bent ready to go for that Tuesday, so you guys are still going to get your Kent with Bent content. And that's pretty much it. That's all I need to say for the channel now. Again, please check the description. There are links for Digital Hammurabi, the YouTube channel, as well as 2 of Dr. Josh's books. So if you're at all interested in any of these topics, please do check that out. Like I said, they're not affiliate links. I'm not making money off of it. I just want to support anyone who deigns to give me some of their precious time. So thank you very much, Dr. Josh. Do you have any final words? Or does Kent Hovind have any final words?
Yeah, let me see if I can track him down. Hang on just a second.
Okay, hold on. Dr. Josh is going to go track down his illustrious colleague, Dr. Hovind.
Yeah, yes, I understand that she'd like to talk to me. What's your name there? Dapper Dino.
Yes, we've spoken before, Dr. Hovind.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of people, okay? And, well, I'm here to help. Well, let me just say, because I've been listening in the other room, and I guess what I would say is that if you guys don't you sound like one of those fellas that believes in evolution, okay? And, so I think you have the burden of proof to prove on such a thing because you want it taught in public schools. But I think and of course you're a dinosaur, and I'm Dr. Dino, and yeah, I think that. Of course, a dinosaur never produced a non-dinosaur. Okay, and dogs don't produce non-dogs. Okay, so we shouldn't be teaching this in the public school system. So evolution is dumb, and of course, water raining down on the rocks only produces soup. It doesn't produce your grandfather. Okay, so. Yeah, I guess what I would say is maybe closing out this stream is come on by down to Dinosaur Adventureland where we whack off atheists. Okay, that's what we do. So you can come on down. I love whacking off atheists, and that's how I get down. Okay. So of course, when you're probably thinking about that 14-foot whale penis, because you're a pervert. So yeah, I'm here to help. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you. And with that, we're going to switch over to the end credits. And we're going to see you guys later. So have a great afternoon, evening, morning, whatever it is over there, everybody. Bye. I just want to take a second to thank my channel members and patrons, especially those pledging $20 and above.
Bob Knob, Bent Hovend, Ian Chen, Chris Love, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, and Res Instance.
My channel members and patrons help make this channel possible, and without their support, this channel really wouldn't exist. If you would like to help support the channel as a member or patron, there are links in the description to both join the channel as well as join the Patreon. Patrons and members get mentioned in these credit scenes, as well as getting early access to my scripted videos, and if you pledge $10 or above, you can also get access to various 3D assets that I create for Blender, both for use in the channel, as well as just general giveaways to my supporters to help in any Blender projects they might have. If a monthly or annual pledge isn't for you, then there is also a merch store linked to the description, and if none of that's right for you, please just like and subscribe because every like and subscription really helps the video out. Thank you.